All right, welcome to the second Progressive Maryland Videocast. It is March 22nd. I'm co-host Hal Ginsberg, along with co-host Karen Guzman. It is March 22nd. Good morning, or good. I did even. What am I gonna? You know what? I had it right for once. Good evening, Karen. How are you?
Good evening, Hal. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm so glad we're getting to do a second video cast. We're going to keep this going. That, by the way, is Acid Jazz. It was a recommendation of our great Progressive Maryland Executive Director, Larry Stafford, by Kevin McLeod, Acid Jazz. And again, you can find us at progressivemaryland.org. If you click on the video audio button at the top of the page there, progressivemaryland.org, click on videos, you'll find us. You can find us at our Progressive Maryland YouTube page as well. You can email me at halginsberg1963@gmail.com. You can also find us. You can also comment at the YouTube page as well. Karen, we're going to just go right back to last week's program. You brought us great information both about the Maryland Trust Act and about the Fight for 15. That is the minimum wage being raised to $15 throughout the state. Let's start with the Trust Act. There's news this week. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So this is one of the biggest updates that we've been seeing. The Maryland Trust Act was basically revised recently, and it passed in the House this Monday. Basically, this new version, the only change that we're seeing, or the biggest difference, I should say, I don't know if there's other changes, is that previously they wanted for police to also stop, for local jails to screen people, to stop screening arrestees for immigration violations. And so we have some public local jails that are in Frederick, are in Hagerstown, and other places in Maryland. And so this bill would still allow jails to do that, but only if a judge signs off on a warrant. And so that's the biggest difference we've been seeing. This revised bill, the Maryland Trust Act, again, for those folks who don't know, would essentially allow people to not be stopped by any police officer, any state official, any sheriff deputy, and be asked for their immigration status. And so this means that if you're, running a traffic light and you get stopped, they do not have a right to ask you what your citizenship status is or ask you for documentation, things like that. And for those folks who did join in on our last podcast or videocast, they heard the concerns that many folks in our communities are having around this, which is around sending their kids to schools, around driving to go to work, and things like that. And so really, this is huge. This means that people are going to feel safer if it gets passed, and that they're going to feel like they can go to work, they can go to school. And so this is huge news for us, but we also did hear from our governor, Larry Hogan, who, did a public statement on Facebook and said that when this bill gets to his office, gets to his desk, that he's definitely going to veto it. And so he is not in agreement with it at all. And part of the reason is because just days before it passed, or days after it passed, I should say, there was a Rockville High School incident, which I'm sure many folks have heard. It's been in the news, it's been a buzz lately. And this incident basically happened with two teenagers, ages 17 and 18, both young men from El Salvador, who raped a young girl who was 14 years old. In Rockville High School, in a bathroom in Rockville High School. And so a lot of folks have just been completely angry by the situation and have used this as a way to say, this is why we don't want the Trust Act to pass. This is why we don't want undocumented people in our communities. And so it's been very huge in terms of where this bill stands right now and what's going to happen. And so we're going to see in the coming days, like, what are the pros and cons from people. But this is definitely a huge topic right now.
All right. And the Trust Act, as it did pass, the revised version provided that at jails, depending on the law within a particular county, folks who had been arrested and were being incarcerated at the jail could be asked about their status only if they had been arrested pursuant to a judge's warrant. Is that correct? So if a police officer arrests you for a traffic offense or some type of misdemeanor and locks you up, without that court warrant, there cannot be any questions about your immigration status.
Yeah, so that's the current bill right now. But before, they didn't want any jail officers to ask, to even screen. They didn't want them to
Period.
screen
Even if
people.
there had been an arrest pursuant to warrant, they
Exactly.
could not ask him.
So
That
that's
was
that's
down
the
the
biggest
hill.
update
So,
right now.
and if you're convicted of a crime, of course, the act would not apply at that point.
Exactly.
Officials obviously will ask you about your status. Yeah, the situation in Rockville, horrible circumstance, an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old. Two immigrants did rape a 14-year-old, and clearly the current administration in Washington, the president is using that as a cudgel to beat up the immigrant community, the immigration activists such as yourself. Um, do you I don't see the link though, Karen, because, and this isn't stopping them, but regardless of the Trust Act, it wouldn't have protected this 14-year-old. Would it have? I'm not sure what's the reason for arguing that we shouldn't have the Trust Act because some immigrants commit horrible crimes.
Right. So just to clarify, this wouldn't apply for anyone who committed a crime. And this is a crime. Both of these teenagers, ages, again, 17 and 18, are being convicted as adults. And so they're not by any means necessary getting away with it. There's proof, they did rape this girl. And so the thing is that a lot of people are just using this to generalize that there's a lot of immigrants, there's a lot of people specifically from Central America, specifically from El Salvador, that are coming to commit crimes. And so the fear is there. There's been a rise in a lot of gang activity also in Montgomery County. And so people are just kind of making these links and these generalizations to the whole immigrant community. And something that I think we all need to be aware of is that just because the situation happened, which again is really unfortunate, I think we're all angered by it, does not mean that all immigrants commit crimes, does not mean that all immigrants are getting away with murder or are getting away with rape or things like that. And so I think that this whole hate speech is definitely to the benefit of what Trump and others want. And I think the fact that Larry Hogan also used it in that way is really disheartening and really shows that there's a lot of people in this community who are not being valued and who are not being treated as human beings. We're generalizing them to be criminals, to be rapists, which is the same rhetoric that Trump used when he was running for president, right? And so I think we just need to be aware that this does not apply for people who commit crimes. So like you said, this would not apply to these young men at all.
Well, you mentioned that the people aren't getting away with crimes, and this is an example of that because the 18-year-old and the 17-year-old didn't get away with it. They were arrested. They're in jail. And it seems that there's overwhelming evidence against them. They're going to be convicted. Now, there's a question, I guess, whether they'll be incarcerated in the United States or perhaps in El Salvador. But without the Trust Act, or if there's a policy that you question every arrestee about their immigration status and deport those immediately if they're unable to prove that they're in this country legally, that could leave us less safe. I've heard activists argue, hey, if you just upon an arrest immediately deport the individual, then you may be deporting somebody who is in fact a dangerous assailant, who is a violent offender, into a country where they may not be held, they may not be arrested, they may find a way to get back into this country and harm somebody else or harm somebody in the country to which they were sent. So if you really want to protect people, it's better to have the American criminal justice system go through its processes and obtain a conviction if that is appropriate.
Yeah, correct. I definitely agree.
But you have I won't say a disagreement, but we may not see eye to eye on whether you believe, and I believe, that an individual who is convicted of a violent offense but is not in this country, is not a citizen, whether they should be kept in prison in this country or sent back to their nation of origin. And you have real concerns, and I do too, but maybe you can explain why you have real concerns about these two individuals who, assuming they are convicted, as we expect, of rape, should not then be sent back to El Salvador to serve their term.
Yeah, my perspective is really just from having a lot of friends who live in El Salvador, or who are from El Salvador, I should say, who has families from El Salvador. I've actually been to El Salvador last year as well, and we're talking about what is unfortunately the murder capital, where every hour one person is being killed in this country, right? And so for young men who are 16, 17, 18 years old, of course they committed a crime, of course they need to be sent to jail, but what jail, what's equivalent to jail here and in El Salvador, two completely different worlds. And in El Salvador, we're talking about jails that are dominated by gangs, dominated by one of the most notorious gangs at that, MS-13. And, people who get sent there are essentially sent to die. They have no hope. There's a lot of crimes that happen. And so we're talking about two young men that if they were to be deported and sent to a jail in El Salvador, might never live again. And that's just the reality of the situation. And so I think we also need to be aware of that when we're sending people to these countries that are now completely dangerous for crimes, for, the drug on wars, for so many different reasons. We're sending them to a death sentence. And so just to be aware of that situation as well.
Oh, it's a real serious problem, and I agree with you. I don't want to send even a dangerous criminal or a hardened criminal. These are not hardened criminals; they're adolescents, but still they've done something that is terrible to another person. I don't think we should send them to an inhumane prison, but I do understand the argument that taxpayers would make and Americans would make, is that we shouldn't be paying 30, 40, 50,000 a year for these individuals to be kept locked up in the United States. I do understand that argument, but we still have to take into account the alternative and how terrible it is. I think where we come down, Karen, is we've got to do something. We've got to do a lot more in this country, so wealthy, the wealthiest country on earth, so that life isn't so unbearable, in many of our neighbors for so many millions of people.
Yeah, that's definitely right. And especially when it comes to this, because these are, like you said, adolescents. And yes, they made a mistake, but should they really, I don't know. I mean, I guess everyone has their own view, but to be sent to that environment, I think is really a human rights issue. It's just a lot of things, right? So I think yeah, it's unfortunate, and we're definitely going to be hearing about where this act stands in the next couple of days. But that is the update on the Maryland Trust Act.
You're watching the Progressive Maryland Videocast at progressivemaryland.org. You may also be watching us at YouTube at our Progressive Maryland channel, co-host Karen Guzman and me, Hal Ginsberg. And we're so glad to have you watching us. We're videotaping, by the way, on March 22nd. It's in the evening here. All right, we start with some of the topics we discussed last week. The other topic that got a lot of our attention was the fight for the $15 minimum wage in Maryland, though not a lot of news this week, and we're kind of in a holding pattern. Karen, at least in Montgomery County, I think everyone's waiting to see who's going to be in the new county council next year and who's going to be the new county executive. The current county executive vetoed the $15 bill. They're also looking at some type of analysis. They're going to commission the county council in Montgomery County and commission an economic analysis to determine the impact on small businesses and on employees. Do you have any additional news, or is it, we're kind of in that holding pattern I mentioned?
No, I think that's been true across the board. I think everyone is just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. But I would just suggest for everyone who is passionate about this, who does care about raising the minimum wage, that they continue to raise awareness in their communities. That's what I've been doing with my friends and family, because a lot of them didn't know about this. And so I think that's what's most important, is just that we continue to raise awareness while we're kind of in flux and waiting to see what happens next.
All right, we're going to talk about the bail reform movement in a few moments with Karen Guzman. She is a progressive activist, focuses to some degree on immigration rights and on immigration issues, but on many other issues as well. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But I do want to play this audio here. This is the governor, and he's announcing some good news. I think something we're all happy about in the environmental movement, those of us who are environmental activists and just concerned about our air, our water. I think we got to be happy. But I do want to play this. This is from last week, Governor Hogan announcing, well, you'll hear the announcement.
Regulations that we proposed would have made it virtually impossible for anyone to ever engage in fracking in Maryland. However, the legislature has failed to act or enact these tough regulations. And that's why I've decided that we must take the next step and move from virtually banning fracking to actually banning fracking. The choice to me is clear.
All right, let me just, I can pot it down there. That's 4 days ago. That's March 18th. And that was Governor Hogan announcing that fracking ban. And I think we're happy about that, Karen, although I'm frustrated that he turned this into an opportunity to kind of pat his own back in terms of, enhancing his environmental credential. I'm not sure that's fair, but he was able to do that. I think that's frustrating.
Yeah. Does he actually have a record on environmental issues? I don't know. I haven't followed environmental issues.
It's actually not a very good one. I mean, one of his the way he kind of stood out when he ran for governor and actually beat Anthony Brown 3 years ago was he was constantly railing against what he called a rain tax. This was a tax that was going to be assessed on developers who built these huge parking lots for malls, because the parking lots with all that pavement, all that asphalt you can think about, are terrible for the bay, for the Chesapeake Bay, because all the water just runs right off in one place. It causes a lot of erosion. It causes a lot of fertilizers to go into the rivers that go into the bay. And it reduces the carrying capacity, because what you really want, and I don't want to go on too much about this, but what you really want is the water to filter through as much soil as possible, which leaches out, which cleans that water. But when it goes on an asphalt, it collects this, the oil, the scum from the cars, all the dirt, the trash that's on the asphalt, whatever it is that could be there, and then kind of rushes off in a very powerful stream, often through farmland where there could be toxins, whether they're the fertilizer or the insecticides. And so it leads to much more concentrated pollution in the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay. And
this has been documented. So the tax that the legislature passed, and I believe it was Governor O'Malley signed, said, hey, if you build huge parking lots, you're going to have to pay an additional fee. You're going to have to pay that fee to help us clean up the bay, which you're helping to pollute. And he mocked it and called it a rain tax. And look at these Democrats, they're taxing rain. And he repealed it. But that was the wrong thing to do. I mean, it was a bad environmental move, not a good one. Now here he's saying, oh, look at me, I'm the anti-fracking guy. But unfortunately, he got an opportunity to do that because some of the Senate leaders in the Democratic Party and our state Senate were not leading the charge against fracking. And it gave him that opening. So.
Yeah. And how do you feel about that? How do you feel about our Democratic representatives not standing up as they should be?
I'll be honest, I feel so upset. This is where I start to feel hopeless. And I think so many other people feel the same way, that we don't have friends in power, that those who make decisions that affect us on a day-to-day basis, that affect our children, that affect our state in profound ways, don't care what we have to say, aren't listening to us, are simply looking at who is putting big money, signing big checks, writing big checks for them when they run in their next election, or perhaps who might hire them should they be voted out of office or should they decide to retire.
Yeah.
So it's very painful. I mean, I assume you feel that way. Most people feel that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really, really sad to see people just going wherever the money is and supporting these large corporations that, like you said, are not in the best interest of our families, of our state as a whole.
On the other hand, we did get a win. We did get fracking banned, so we should be pleased, and I am pleased about that. I wanted you to talk. You wanted to talk about another area where big industry is pushing its weight around, and that's the bonds industry in Maryland?
Yeah, so another hot topic and something that actually was just passed today is around bail reform. So the Maryland Senate passed the legislation today by a vote of 26-19 that would essentially back a key aspect of allowing folks who do not have the money to pay for bails to not pay for their bonds because they're poor, because they don't have the money to do so, to still be able to find a way. So basically what they said is that last month, right, like our highest state court issued a ruling that said that the judges want to impose a least onerous conditions when setting bail for a defendant who is not considered dangerous or a flight risk. And so we've been hearing from a lot of different activists. We've been hearing predominantly from Attorney General Brian Frosh, who came out and said we should not hold people in jail for longer time than they need to be, or we should not have these bail bonds on them, inflicted on them when they do not have the means to pay it. And like you said, these are huge, huge, huge corporations. These are people who are profiting essentially from people who are poor in our communities. And the consequences that come with this is that even if they're not guilty, and even if they don't have a lawyer, they don't have all of these things that, again, contribute to the system of injustice. But because they cannot pay their bond, then they're not able to leave, and they're not able to, continue on with their lives. And so I think this is something that's huge. This is something that is now going on to the House. And so we're going to see what happens then. And from the articles that I've been reading, a lot of people don't know exactly how the House is going to act, what they're going to say, how they're going to pass, if they're going to pass. But something that I think is really interesting is that the Legislative Black Caucus, who previously did not necessarily have a position on this bill, is now meeting tomorrow to reconvene and to see where they're going to stand and how they're going to come together on this particular bill. And so I think along with them, there's a bunch of other activists and a bunch of other community members who are going to be more forceful with this. And so I think in the coming days, we're going to see what happens and how they convene and what they have to say. But this is definitely huge and something that we should all be on the lookout for.
Yeah, it's a really big problem. The bail bond industry takes a lot of money from poor residents mostly, who are the ones who cannot afford to post the bond when they're arrested. If there's a bail set, poor people don't have money in their bank account. They don't have a wealthy family member who can help bail them out, so they've got to buy that bond. I looked at the cost while we were talking, Karen, while you were talking. So a $5,000 bond from a bail bonds person costs about $560. You pay 10%, plus you have to pay a fee to the sheriff, and you have to pay another fee to the bonds person. So you're looking at about $560 you have to pay up front. Still very, very significant expense. Many people can't afford even that for a $5,000 bond. Poor people are in jail for several days. They could lose their jobs, even if they're not convicted of it. Even if in the end their charges are dismissed. Exactly. Or they're found not guilty. Doesn't matter. They're still out that $560. They could still have lost their job. And the Maryland Court of Appeals looked at this situation. They said, hey, this isn't right. This isn't fair. You're taking advantage of poor people, struggling people. At the same time, wealthy individuals get out, or people who may not be wealthy but have access to big money can post bond, and they may be true dangers to the community. The bonds industry says, the bail bond industry says that it's unsafe what the Court of Appeals is proposing, because they're saying we want lower bail for some offenses. We want low, $50 bail, $75 bail. The bond industry is saying that's not safe, because the folks who post that bail aren't going to have an incentive to return to court. But in fact, for them, it's a lot of money. And the judges are supposed to look at ability to pay and also flight risk and danger to the community. If the judge is satisfied that a low bond will be sufficient, then that's what the judge should impose. At the same time, if somebody is a true danger to the community, an example, you have a serial predator, a sexual predator, or some type of violent, domestic violence perpetrator, who you can't believe will not go after a spouse or a lover, if they're released, no matter what you set the bail, they shouldn't get bail, period, Karen.
Right.
And the bond industry is saying, no, 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 no. Everyone should get bail, but it should be very high. So we make the most money.
So we profit, right? Profit over people, unfortunately.
It's exactly the same as the fracking situation. Although fracking, we got to win in the end. Although many Democrats, were looking at, I think that some, not many, there were a couple, and certainly more Republicans. Now with the bail bill, what I saw is that 15 Democrats and 14 Republicans voted in favor of it in the Senate. A number of Democrats voted against it. No Republicans voted against the bill. So again, Democrats were on balance better, but still many did not, join with the minority communities of color and poor people's advocates. Karen, it's another situation where we just say our government isn't ours.
Yeah, which is why I'm really looking forward to hearing what the Legislative Black Caucus determines and how, what their position is on this. And I hope that they really do consider how this is affecting, like you said, communities of color, men of color, predominantly, right, that we've been seeing. So hopefully something positive comes out from this.
Well, you know what? I was surprised because I had read that the Senate sponsor of the bill had actually withdrawn it, wasn't going forward with it, but I guess the vote happened anyway. I want to just be real clear. So again, look, we're not saying Democrats are as bad as Republicans. The bill passed the Senate 29-18 in Maryland. That was 15 Democrats, 14 Republicans who were in favor of it, but 18 Democrats opposed it. So Democrats were better, but not good enough to stop the bill. Not good enough. All right, we got a couple more stories. We're going right through this half hour quickly. We're doing the best we can. You're listening to Karen Guzman and me, Hal Ginsberg. ProgressiveMaryland.org is the website. This is a Progressive Maryland videocast. And some exciting news on the gubernatorial race front. It looks like, although it's not definite, Karen, that Bernie Sanders' surrogate, former NAACP president Ben Jealous, is going to run for governor. I think this is exciting news.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. And I can't wait for him to confirm and say that he is, so we can back him up fully.
Yeah, we both agree that it's really important for him to come out early to say that he's not going to take any corporate funds. This would really help him, I think, solidify the support that is there for him among young voters, and I think many working people who feel that they don't have a voice in Annapolis, who feel they don't have a voice in Washington.
Yeah, definitely. I think he definitely has a chance, though, for sure. And I think I've heard him speak, on YouTube or seen his videos, and he's a great speaker. He has a lot of great stories, great experience, really diverse, right? He comes from a mixed background, white and black, which I think is really interesting in terms of what his perspective is on a lot of racial tensions that we're seeing in our country. And I'm really excited to see where he stands on all of these issues and to see him come out, and hopefully that he says that he is running so that we can support him.
Yeah, I think he does have a shot. I really do. I understand that the governor is popular, but I think if Jealous speaks to working people, if he really focuses on Marylanders maybe who've been left behind, and also talks to those of us who are, more comfortable, perhaps more secure economically, but talks about issues like the environment, I think he'd have, like schools, like education. I think he really would have a chance. I want to play this clip real quick if I can. This is Bernie Sanders. Just a little over a week ago, 9 days ago, he was in the poorest county in America, McDowell County, West Virginia, not too far from Maryland, actually, not too far from Western Maryland, the Panhandle, where there's a lot of poverty, a lot of generational poverty there. Here's Bernie Sanders, and I just want to play this clip, just a little bit of it, because I think it tells us what Ben Jealous could do if he's really serious about winning.
Yes, I'm a retired UNWA miner, and I never dreamed that I'd get to thank you personally myself for the bill that you have co-sponsored, and how the Senate Bill 175, the Miners Protection Act, which I'm one of those miners that will lose.
All right, so you hear very loud applause, and I'll just pot that down right there. We don't need to play a lot of it, but that coal miner is thanking Bernie Sanders from Vermont, a socialist, because he introduced legislation to make sure that that miner and his fellow miners retired will have health care going forward. That was a county that went, I think, by about 30 points for the Republican in the last presidential election. I think this tells us, Karen, what Ben Jealous needs to do, what he can do if he wants to be the governor.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's powerful.
You got to go out and talk to people who are struggling and say, you deserve health care. Your kids deserve an education that, you don't have to bankrupt yourself to get. They don't have to bankrupt their future. They don't have to risk their future. You mentioned the student loans last week. Karen, that's a huge issue for so many folks in this state. I think these are the issues that he's got to hammer. And if he does, he may be the next governor.
Yeah, it's exciting. Hopefully that does come true.
All right, just a few more moments with us, a Progressive Maryland podcast. If you want to send in any questions, you can email me, halginsberg1963@gmail.com. You can also post at the YouTube video. You can just, add a comment and we'll see it there. We'll be at progressivemaryland.org. We'll post this, and you can also get lots of information about Progressive Maryland. And we'll be back again next week. Karen, thank you so much for joining me. It was great second go round here.
Thank you so much, Hal, and thanks everyone for watching and staying tuned. See you next time.
All right, and that's going to do it. Let's go out again with a little more of that acid jazz. We both really like that.
Let's do it.